However, the reduction of the defender's strength that is caused by all of the sacrifices will usually affect his body reports only later. Not immediately, because frequently failing the right has to be early in the recipe. Thus, the defender tries to infuse immediate strength by paying for it later. In other words, he borrows like anyone else and needs more than he has. In order to assess the result of each various point of resistance, we have to examine the purpose of the enemy's attack. It is to gain possession of our theater of operations, or at least a substantial part of it. For the concept of the whole implies at least the greater part, and is strictly a few miles wide is seldom of independent strategic importance. Therefore, so long as the attacker is not in possession, so long, in other words, as fear of our strength has prevented him from entering our theater of operations or seeking out our position or has caused him to avoid the battle we are prepared to give, the object of the defense have been accomplished. Our defense dispositions have proved not effective. Admittedly, this is only a negative success, which will not directly produce much strength for the real counter. But it may do so in an indirect way, gradually the strength that passage is lost to the aggressive. Turn loss is always a disadvantage that is bound in some way to weaken him if he loses it. And thus, in the first three stages of defense, in other words, those two be points of importance. The very lack of a decision constitutes a success for the defense. That, however, it is not the case in the fourth stage. If the enemy lays siege to our fortress, we must leave them in good time. In other words, it is up to us to bring about a discipline by positive action. This is also the case for the enemy that pursued us into the future without receiving any of our fortresses. While we may have more time in between after the enemy that his interest, the assumption will remain that we shall have to take the initiative in the act. Indeed, the enemy would then have taken all of the area. That was the object of his attack. But he hold it as a moment. The tension continues to exist and the decision is still to come. So long as the defender's strength increases every day while the attacker diminishes. The actions of a decision is certainly in the form of presented, but only because the effects of the general risks to which the defender has continually exposed himself are finally catching up with him. The point of the culmination will necessarily be reached when the defender must make up his mind and act, when the advantages of waiting have been completely exhausted. There is, of course, no infallible means of telling when the point has come. A great many conditions and circumstances will determine. We should know, however, that the approach of winter is usually the most natural turning point. If we cannot prevent the enemy from entering in the area that he has occupied, we might as well give up for lost. Even so, those the example or towards the reminder that this is not a universal law. What is it that, broadly speaking, constitutes any discipline? In our discussion, we have always assumed the situation will occur in the form of battle, but that is not necessarily so. We can think of any number of engagements by smaller forces that may lead to a change in fortune, either because they really end in rupture or because the probability of their consequences necessitate an enemy's retreat. No other kind of decision is possible in the field of operation without that necessarily follows from the concept of what we have told. Even when the hostile army is forced to retreat because of the lack of food, this fact does after all arise out of the limitations that our forces impose. If our army were not present, the enemy would surely find ways of helping you. So even when his offense has won its support, the enemy has become the victim of the difficult condition of the advancing routine and recruit from hunger, a sickness and the need to detach troops. It is really the fear of our fighting for it alone that makes him turn about and bang it on against it. Nevertheless, there is a vast difference between such a decision and one that has been reached at the border. At the border, his armies are faced by our arms. They alone hold me in check with him damage. But when his offense has won its course, he has been worn out largely by his own efforts. This will in part is completely looking value to our arms, which are no longer dependent to the only factor in decisions that though they may be the ultimate. The ground has been prepared for it by the down of the enemy's force during their advance to the extent where a retreat and a completely reversal of the situation can be caused by the mere possibility of our reaction. In such a case, one is bound to be realistic to build critical decisions to the difficulty of the offensive. Admittedly, one would not be able to find an example in which the defending force were not also effective, but for the sake of practical consideration, it is important to distinguish which of these two factors are dominant. In the light of these ideas, we think it is fair to say that the two decisions and therefore two kinds of reactions are possible under the defending side, depending on whether the attacker is to perish by the sword or by a own exertion. It is obvious that the first type of decision will predominate in the first three figures of defense, and the second type in the fourth. Indeed, the latter two essentially only take place with the retreat penetrate deeper into the interior of the country. It is in fact the only reason that can justify such a retreat and the great sacrifices of themselves. Two basically different sets of resistance have now been identified. There are cases the military heads where they stand out as clearly and distinctly as the that concept ever came with practice. In 1745, Peter the Great attacked the Austrians of the as they were descended from the Benjamin at a time where their strength could not have been sapped either by exertion or by the attacking of troops. Wellington, on the other hand, stayed in the fortified multi-foiler until cold and hunger had left him seeing his army subjugated that it would do off its own port. In that case, the defenders took no part in the actual part of the rolling down the unit. At other times, where both sides were forcing that one was distinctly dominant. Influence of the 1912 in that famous campaign, so many savage and duty were fought that. Under different circumstances, most of the division might have been reached by the sword alone. Yet there is probably no other achievement which the evidence is so clear that the voter was destroyed by his own bloodshed. Only about 80,000 of the 800,000 men who really left the French center reached Moscow. Only 13,000 men have been attacked. Casualties therefore numbered 187 out with 5,072 to one more people died. How can feel that a number that are so-called temporizing and probably the few established people? They were calculated primarily and destroy the enemy by making him exhaust himself. In general, there have been many campaigns that were won on that principle without anyone explicitly saying anything. Then will arrive at the truth called the many decisions only by ignoring the far-fetched explanation of the story and instead closely examining the events themselves. We believe that we have thus adequately described the considerations that underlie the facts and the various things. By pointing out those two means of the difference, we hope we have explained clearly how the principle really runs through the whole system and combined with the principle of positive action in such a way that the latter may appear early in one case and late in another. Afterwards, the advantages of rating will be seen to be exhausted. We believe that we have now surveyed as well and have really limited the whole field of defense. True, there still are aspects that are important enough to deserve a chapter on their own. Points on which a series of reflections to be based on and which ought not to be overlooked. For instance, the nature and influence of forces and defense camp with the Katsuman and rigorous political operations so covered. We should go with these in chapters that follow. Still, none of these subjects seem to fall outside the scope of the ideas of praying about, but merely constitute their application to specific places and circumstances. The foregoing sequence of ideas have developed out of the concept of the place and its relation to attack. We have relieved those simple ideas of reality and so benefit of how to move from reality to these simple ideas into the cell of analytical base. In the course of the day, we will therefore not need to revert to arguments that themselves are in. Oh, what a minute. But armed with products to the diversity of possible combinations can so change the appearance and way the character of the armed defense, especially if there is no acts of fighting, but the outcome is affected by the fact that there could be that one is almost typically some new effective principle of hero waits to survey the vast difference between savage and repulsive and straightforward battle. The effective of strategic reward. Events thinking of getting that far, it will lead one to assume that a different force must be a conjunction someone like that of the starting of service. The difference between the moment word between Washington did that any other opinion was exist. The second thing the enemy instructors would that he'd been seeking not to, or on the far side of the river that he believes to be impassable, or even if he feels he would jeopardize his supply by advancing any further, they still need to force the defenders on it, which produces these results. What actually helps the aggressor's action is the blood reviewed by the defender's force, either in major engagements or at particularly important things. But he is not likely to conceal it, at least not openly. One may admit that even where the decision has been bloodless, it was determined in advance and unless the engagement that did not take place but had merely been offered. In that case, it would be argued that strategic planning of these engagements rather than the tactical decisions should be considered beyond operative principle. Moreover, such strategic planning will be dominant only in cases where the defense is conducted by some means other than port of arms. We admit this, but it brings us to the very point we wanted to make. What we say, in fact, is this. While the tactical result of the engagement are assumed to be the basis on which strategic planning, it is always possible. And the serious is that the attacker will produce on that basis. Even in that endeavor, but all to be tactically superior in order to upset the enemies of the brain. The latter therefore can never be considered as something independent. Joining between valid when one has reason to be confident of tactic as a size. To illustrate briefly what we mean, let us recall that a general such as Bonaparte wrote, an increase in cut through all the brainly strategic plans and such a certain battle. We have seen seldom doubted the battle of Alphy. But whenever the society is ready and better, with all their might to crush in battle with superior force, whenever they engage with suddenly weaker nation. The scheme was swept away like this. Schemes of that so would have been enough to track a general like them. But it would have been prone to prepare Bonaparte and his army in the way the Persians held down in the Constance in the southern war. Because Bonaparte was well aware that everything turned on tactical results and because he could learn that while those situation were different in those respects, that is why we think that if this were to emphasize that all strategic planning will rest on tactical success, and that whether solutions arrived at in battle or not, this is in all cases the uncertainty from basic prevail. This is different. Only when one has no need to clear the outfit because of the enemy's character of situation, because the two armies are even matched physically and psychologically, or indeed because one own side is stronger. Only then can one expect results from specific combinations in it. Oh, yeah. Oh. Oh. When we look at history of war, you find a large number of campaigns in which the attacker broke off his defensive without having fought a decisive battle. Consequently, where strategic combinations of appearance affected, we might believe that such combinations have at least played inherent power, and that they will normally decide to happen on their own when other one does not need to assume the such superiority of the offensive top of the situation. Our answer here must be that this assumption too is a low-managing situation that arises in the field of operations and are therefore part of the war itself. The real reason for the ineffectiveness of multi-attack lies in the political conditions in war. The general condition for which a war arises in that form is natural basis. But also determine its level. This will later be discussed in greater into under the heading of war points. But these general conditions have transformed warfare into modern efforts, and once the original hostilities have forced the chain among conflicted entities to such a degree that freedom was very much an initiative. This is down to effective acting, facade and positive action with particular strength. It's not surprising, therefore, that one can stop such a reference support the attack by the American student during where resolution is something implied by a multitude of considerations that it has almost due to exist. The mere show of the reason for office offense. We can show that in many cases the reason for the defendant being successful without hate but is not allowing no help by who occupies the impregnable policeman. In order to say the beyond the room is that law, the theater of operations, knowing the broad stream that track from vertically. Knowing the ease in which the theater of below can be paralleled their well-planned surgery movement. Not only possible this to routine and must be weaponry, but vehemently implemented the whole weapon. Rather than having the perfect attributed to every project, both that alone concern us here. We must get that industrial stuff military through communal work becoming founded down and stuff to be good better to five by five and with the rest. At this point, let us examine the mass common form the vast names of offensive campaigns that filled without excessive battle being fought. The aggressor marches into hostile territory, we drive the enemy back with him, but then decides, but then begins to have doubt about risking a decisive battle. The House occasionally coming actively and made a contract only once interested only in taking it over. In short, who believed that they were the enemy of their stupid battle, as their previous styles were ready to fight out any time, and so forth. All of being narrow pictures, which generally used to be delivered on the government that the government, the word at large, and literally said, the truth of the matter is that the enemy delivery have been found truthfully. Here we are not talking of the truth in which the aggressor failed to attack. They will literally be with no ease. You will see us because after that have really exposed that the sexual attack had already triggered people and resulted in genuine so we have in mind that students university was like directly talking to hand in the middle of the content contest. At this point the attacker will wait for a period of time events to explode. There's also a real reason to expect attack a goal of achievement. The very fact that the attacker had been it's implied that the enemy and Steve Thomas and the other and those. This is a person when we're passing the listeners and pays of the audio and typically. That daily will be to follow the feel of the enemy from instead of the next step of being the solid basin for the field of the legal function argue. Information answer when the everything is just within that credits. Never did begin to enter.